Welcome back to London's Dark Archives. In this thrilling series we're covering the Great Train Robbery. Now let's get back to where we left off in episode 4. The night of August 8th, 1963 marked one of the most audacious crimes in British history, the Great Train Robbery. A group of 15 men, led by mastermind Bruce Reynolds, executed a meticulously planned heist on the Royal Mail train from Glasgow to London. After manipulating a signal to stop the train near Bradale Bridge, they overpowered the crew and made off with 2.6 million in used banknotes, equivalent to tens of millions today. Their precision was striking, every detail was considered, the timing, the equipment and the handling of the train's crew. Yet even the most thorough plans have cracks, and cracks began to show almost immediately after the robbery. After the robbery, the gang retreated to their pre-arranged hideout, Leatherslade Farm, a secluded farmhouse in Buckinghamshire. The original plan was to lie low for several days before dispersing. They'd hoped the initial media frenzy would die down before any meaningful police leads developed. However, it didn't take long for anxiety to set in. News of the heist dominated headlines across the country, with the authorities labelling it one of the largest crimes in British history. The public's fascination only heightened the pressure. Fearing the police might close in faster than they anticipated, the gang decided to cut their stay short. Reynolds was particularly adamant about leaving no trace behind. He insisted that every member of the gang wear gloves at all times, ensuring that no fingerprints or DNA could be left on the surfaces. Reynolds also directed them to systematically wipe down every item and surface before leaving. This wasn't an haphazard effort, it was done with military-like precision. Every door handle, window and surface was wiped down multiple times by multiple people. Despite these efforts, cracks in their discipline began to show. The gang was tired, stressed and increasingly panicked. Even with Reynolds' strict orders, small oversights crept in. Within hours of the robbery, multiple police units and forensics teams descended on Bradale Bridge, where the heist had taken place. Every detail of the crime scene was scrutinised. The manipulated signal, the traces left on the track, and even the train itself were examined for clues. Not long after, the investigation widened to include Leatherslade Farm. It was here that the police found significant breakthrough. Thanks to a tip-off, the farm was discovered just days after the robbery. As the officers combed through the farmhouse, they uncovered evidence that had been left behind despite the gang's effort to wipe everything down. Discarded items, overlooked prints, and the remnants of their stay gave investigators critical leads. News of the police operation spread, and the gang's anxiety soared. The discovery of Leatherslade Farm was a crushing blow. The farmhouse had meant to be their safe haven, but now it was a liability. With evidence piling up and the noose tightening, desperation began to set in. In the last-ditch attempt to erase any remaining traces of their presence, the gang thought about going back and burning the farm down. The idea was simple but risky. Obliterate any remaining evidence before the police could extract more clues. However, the sheer scale of the police presence in the area made this plan untenable. Officers were patrolling nearby roads, forensics teams were stationed at key points, and the risk of being caught in the act was far too high. Faced with these dangers, the plan to burn it down was ultimately abandoned. Despite their efforts to stay one step ahead, the gang now found themselves back into a corner. Their meticulous planning was starting to unravel, and the fallout from the robbery was only just beginning. After the robbery, the gang scattered. Some attempted to settle into new lives with their stolen fortunes, while others found themselves pursued relentlessly by the police. The years that followed would see arrests, escapes, and the fallout from one of the most famous crimes in British history. Now, let's follow the fates of the key players. Bruce Reynolds was the brains behind the Great Train Robbery, a meticulous planner and career criminal with a flair for bold high-stakes heists. After the robbery, Reynolds knew the heat would be intense, with the full weight of the British police force bearing down on him and his gang. He quickly fled the country, taking his wife and son with him. Their first destination was Mexico, where Reynolds began spending his share of the 2.6 million all. For a time, life in Mexico was idyllic. The family lived in relative luxury, enjoying the fruits of their ill-gotten fortune. Reynolds believed he could stay ahead of the law, but the dream life didn't last. As time went on, the stolen money began to dwindle. With limited options for earning a legitimate income, Reynolds faced a difficult choice. The family next moved to Canada, using false identity to avoid detection. While Reynolds searched for work to maintain their lifestyle, they lived mostly modestly, always aware of the authorities might still catch up with them. However, the pressure and instability of living on the run soon took its toll. Eventually, the Reynolds family relocated to France, where Bruce hoped to connect with former criminal contacts and find a fresh opportunity. But the money was running out, and so were the options. Despite his best efforts, the once meticulously planned escape route had come to a dead end. Desperate, and with few places left to hide, Reynolds decided to return back to the UK. He believed his old network of criminal associates would help him get back on his feet. However, the British police were still watching, and any move he made on home soil carried enormous risk. Eventually, in 1968, after years of living under false identities and constant fear of capture, Bruce Reynolds was finally arrested in Torquay, Devon. The police had tracked him down after a long and methodical investigation. His capture marked a significant victory for the authorities, who had been determined to bring the mastermind behind the heist to justice. Reynolds was sentenced to 25 years, a harsh penalty reflective of the scale and audacity of the robbery. He served 10 years before being released in 1978. Buster Edwards is one of the most well-known members of the Great Train Robbery. He fled to Mexico with Bruce Reynolds, and accompanied by his family, they initially lived a lavish lifestyle funded by their share of the robbery's proceeds. However, their newfound wealth didn't last. The money began to dwindle quickly due to a combination of high living costs, mismanagement, and their inability to launder such a significant sum. In addition to the financial struggles, homesickness weighed heavily on Edwards' family. His wife June found life in Mexico increasingly difficult, and their longing for home became a turning point for Edwards and his family. Realising they could no longer sustain life as fugitives and desiring to reunite with their extended family in England, Edwards made the decision to return home. By 1966, he had quietly negotiated his return to the UK, believing that surrendering was his best option. Upon arriving, he was arrested and stood trial for his role in the robbery. Despite cooperating in turning himself in, the court showed little leniency, and he was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Edwards spent 9 years behind bars before being released early in 1975. Douglas Gordon Goody played a central role in the Great Train Robbery, regarded by authorities as one of the operation's masterminds. One of Goody's most critical contributions to the heist came through his connection to the Ulsterman, the informant who provided the inside information necessary to pull off the robbery. The intelligence provided was invaluable, elevating the robbery from a reckless gamble to a highly coordinated operation. In August 1963, Goody's world began to unravel. Following the robbery, police launched one of the largest investigations in British history, scouring the country for clues. Goody was soon arrested and taken to the Leicester City Police Headquarters for questioning. There, he faced Detective Chief Inspector Peter Viber of the Flying Squad, a relentless interrogator known for his determination to bring the train robbers to justice. The evidence against Goody proved overwhelming, and he was charged with his role in the heist. In court, he was handed a 30-year prison sentence. The sentence reflected both the magnitude of the crime and the authorities' determination to send a strong message to Britain's criminal underworld. Goody served 12 years before being released from prison in 1975. Charlie Wilson, known as the gang's treasurer, played a pivotal role in managing the distribution of the Great Train Robbery's all. Trusted by the group for his discretion and reliability, he meticulously allocated a share to each member, ensuring the spoils were divided as promised. This role made him an essential figure in the gang's operation and solidified his position as a key player. Wilson's reputation for silence earned him the nickname the Silent Man, and when he was arrested and brought to the trial at Aylesbury Assizes in April 1964, he refused to speak or cooperate with the police or prosecutors. His stoic demeanour, combined with the high-profile nature of the trial, made him one of the more enigmatic figures of the case. Despite his silence, the overwhelming evidence led to a 30-year prison sentence, and he was sent to HMP Winson Green to serve his sentence. But Wilson had no intention to stand behind bars. On the 12th of August 1964, just 4 months after his incarceration, he orchestrated one of the most daring prison escapes in British history. A 3-man gang armed and determined, broke into the prison and facilitated Wilson's escape. The escape was so well executed, the authorities were left scrambling to understand how it had been pulled off. Following that escape, Wilson and his family fled to Quebec in Canada, living under assumed identities. They attempted to blend into the quiet rural surroundings, but during Christmas 1964, the Wilsons travelled to Acapulco, where they met up with fellow fugitives Bruce Reynolds and Bruce Reynolds. The trio's reunion, however, was short-lived. Reynolds and his family later moved to Montreal, and plans for a robbery in Canada were thwarted by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. In January 1968, after nearly 4 years on the run, Wilson's luck ran out. His wife had made a phone call to her parents back home in England and inadvertently provided the lead for Scotland Yard to trace their location. Wilson was quickly captured on the 24th of January 1968, bringing his life of freedom to an abrupt end. Wilson was returned to England and sent to HMP Durham, where he served an additional 10 years in a nice security unit. Despite his escape and years on the run, Wilson remained tight-lipped about his experiences and his knowledge of the heist. His loyalty and silence become one of the defining traits of the Great Train Robbery's most notorious figures. Brian Field played a pivotal role in the Great Train Robbery. Although he didn't participate in the heist itself, he was a vital link between the robbery's masterminds and the insiders who provided the critical intelligence about the Royal Mail train schedule and operations. Field also had a hand in the logistical planning. He arranged for the gang's post-robbery escape and was responsible for purchasing Leatherslade Farm. His task included overseeing the farm's clean-up operation to eliminate any trace evidence after the gang's departure, a job that in hindsight was poorly executed and left crucial clues behind for the police investigators. On the 16th of April 1964, Field stood trial with the other arrested members of the gang. Although he was not found guilty of robbery, he was convicted of conspiracy to rob and perverting the course of justice. For these charges, he was sentenced to 25 years for conspiracy and an additional 5 years for obstruction. Despite his acquittal from the actual robbery, Justice Atkinson expressed doubts about Field's innocence, stating in court that he wouldn't be surprised if Field not only had been part of the conspiracy, but had also been one of the robbers. Field appealed his conviction, and on the 13th of July 1964, his appeal was partially upheld. The charges of conspiracy to rob were overturned, reducing his sentence to just 5 years. Field served his time and was released in April 1967. Despite his reduced sentence, his role in facilitating one of the most infamous heists in British history remained undeniable.
The rest of the gang was all caught and sentenced around the end of 1963. Roy James, the getaway driver, was sentenced to 30 years. He was released in 1975 after serving 12. James Hussey, nicknamed Big Jim, sentenced to 30 years, also released 75 after serving 12. Roger Caudry, a technical expert that helped with blocking the signal, sentenced to 20 years, released in 71 after serving 7 years. Bob Welch was a key participant in the robbery, sentenced to 30 years, released in 76 after serving 12. Tommy Wisby, the Muscle, sentenced to 30 years, released in 76 after serving 12 years. And Bob Bent, who was involved in securing the train crew, sentenced to 25 years, released in 1970 after serving 6 years.
With the police closing in on the gang after the robbery, Ronnie Biggs returned home, bringing his share of the loot in 2 canvas bags. However, somehow, Biggs had left some fingerprints at the scene, and that led to his arrest just 3 weeks later. In 1964, he stood trial with his fellow robbers and he was sentenced to 30 years in prison. However, Biggs' life took a dramatic turn just 15 months into his sentence. On the 8th of July 1965, he was part of a prison break, and with the help of outside associates, he scaled the walls of Wandsworth Prison, using a rope ladder, and leapt onto the roof of a waiting removal van. In a flash, the gang's most infamous member vanished, and the police were left stunned. Biggs' escape marked the beginning of one of the most notorious abscondments in criminal history, a journey spanning decades, continents, and countless close calls with the law. In the next episode, we'll follow his life on the run, his time in Brazil, and his eventual return to Britain. Thank you for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please check out my other videos. I try to release a new one every week, and if you can, like and subscribe because it really does help out. Thanks a lot.